What's going on, everybody? I've been looking forward to this Q&A, knowing that after the National there would be a lot of different questions and thoughts and follow-ups and stuff, and there are some great questions this week. Remember, if you ever have a question, simply in the comments down below, just simply type out your question. I'd love to add it to the list and get to that question and share my thoughts. As always, I am not the answer for everything, but I do have thoughts on everything. So if you're interested in my thoughts, I'd be happy to share what I have to think about, whatever the topic is. This particular week, there are a couple of great questions that I felt needed some visuals to assist in my explanation of things. So there will be a few more things to see on this particular video. I know some people tend to just listen and plug it in while they're doing something, but there are a couple of times that there are things that I think are beneficial to see that I'm gonna add as graphics this week. I'm a very visual person, and that's one of the reasons that I've kept this channel as just a YouTube thing, and I'm not trying to do a podcast out of it. Although I know some people treat it like a podcast by simply listening to the audio. I like to see things, and I like to look at things to understand them better. So I try to do a lot of graphics. I try to do stuff like that so that whatever it is that I'm trying to explain or share my thoughts on, it's as clear as it can be. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is, starting with this episode, I'm going to open up the submissions for the July pickups of the month. I'm really excited about this month. So many people got some incredible cards this month, whether it because they were at the National, whether it be because it's summer and maybe you have a little bit extra money to spend, maybe you were inspired by some things you saw at the National, but I'm really, really excited about this month's pickups. So down below, in the description of this video, I will have a link. That link, as always, will ask you just a couple of quick questions like your name, what it is that you bought, and an opportunity to upload that picture that you've taken. Now, the better the picture you take, the better it will look on the screen when I show it off. So if you get me a great picture, that will make it more fun for everyone to see the card that you picked up. This has quickly become one of my favorite things of the month. I look forward to it all month. So please, if you get a moment, upload your favorite pickup of the month. Let's go ahead, though, and take a look at this week's first question. Question. Dylan and I have been discussing other PSA undergraded eras, similar to the one that we've currently been in for the last few years of stricter grading. Have you or your dad found runs of older PSA cert numbers as well that seem too sharp to be true? I personally found one run on accident years back, and notice when I have the choice of several PSAs, I always settle on one particular PSA cert number era run. Much appreciated, Greg. Man, this is a great question. And it's something that I've talked a little bit about on the channel, but not this specific topic. So, there's going to be development in every industry. There's going to be improvements in every industry. There's going to be more technology in every industry that's used. If you look at a car that was made in 1980 and compare it to a car that's made today, they're so different, it's incredible. And so what happens is, as more technology is involved in whether it be a good or a service, there's going to be changes. And one of the things we know about PSA since they started in the mid-1990s is they've made changes. Now, for better or worse, and whatever you think of PSA or any of the grading companies, SGC has done the same. I say PSA, but it could be PSA or SGC. The question tends to be more about PSA, which is why I'm going to kind of focus on the PSA aspect in this video. But they're using technologies now that didn't exist. You know, PSA is using a GemmaMint program that helps them determine the centering. They didn't have that years ago. That same program scans the cards, and in the scanning of the cards, it finds if that card, I mean, allegedly, according to them, it finds whether that card had previously been submitted, because each paper and each image and each piece of cardboard has like a fingerprint of its own, just from the textures and the things going on with the card. And so those are being scanned in and compared to previous submissions. SGC uses a scanning device that checks for wrinkles that might be hard to see with the naked eye. We know that they are doing things differently. Now, by doing things differently, they're going to be catching things that they hadn't previously caught. As a result, kind of by definition, they're going to be catching more stuff. And if they're catching more stuff, the grades are going to be more difficult. Another piece of this is, you know, in the 1990s, there weren't a ton of cards being submitted to PSA each month. So there could be a small group of graders. Well, now they're having, 1.5 million or something cards submitted each month. And if you have that many cards submitted each month, then surely there's going to be more hiring, and there's going to be more different sets of eyes doing the grading. And by having more, the expertise kind of watered down, there's going to be more of a variance, because again, this is a human thing. You know, anything where humans are doing it, you know, there's going to be a bigger variance. If you go to the haircut place where there's one person who's been doing it for 30 years, your haircut's going to be pretty similar each time. But if you go to a haircut place that recently expanded and now there's 20 people cutting hair, there's gonna be a variance between them. And that's one of the things that happens with PSA. Now, because of that, some of the grading has gotten tougher, and there's also a wider, you know, deviation of what the cards are grading at. And there are people who feel they've graded harder. And largely, I think that PSA is grading harder. And because they're grading harder, when the card was graded is suddenly, not suddenly, but has over the last couple of years, maybe affected the grade that the card received. A card that maybe received a 5 in 1998 might receive a 3 or a 4 now. And I'm not the only person who thinks that, and that's a whole different can of worms. I've done some videos on that. But what I want to do today is talk a little bit about this particular question of, are there phases where the grades have been tougher and other phases where the grades have been more lenient? And in order to be able to even diagnose that, we need to be able to look at some of the clues to determine when a card was graded. There are different labels, different flips in the companies, PSA especially. PSA has had 11 different generations to their slabs. 11. And by looking at the flip, the label, you can get information about when it was graded. Now, we don't have exact dates. There was a lot of overlap where they were using the rest of these while they started using some of these. So it's not a perfect science. Also, the thing that people need to understand is the serial numbers are not perfectly sequential. They're largely sequential, but there are some stretches. For example, there are some labels that start with a 9 that were done quite a few years ago. And so what happens is you might see a serial number with a 9 at the beginning of the serial number at the top of the flip, and you go, oh, this is a new grade. Not necessarily. It gets a little confusing. So what I wanted to do, and I did a full video on this. I'll put a link in the description down below to that video where I go through the very specific differences between, at the time, the 10 holders. The 11th holder is the newer holder that they've now pulled back from. That's a little bit of a heavier duty acrylic, plastic, whatever, for the holder. But it doesn't look different. It's just a different weight and a different material quality. So I'll put a link to that down below. But I want to do a brief overview of some clues that you want to look for when you're looking to buy a card, to get some idea as to when it was graded. Serial number is a clue. It's not the final answer. It is a clue in addition to some other clues. And I think it's important that we're aware of this, because most people agree that, generally speaking, a card graded 20 years ago was graded much easier than it would be graded now. So let's take a look specifically at the different flips, the different holders, the different serial numbers, so we can have a little bit of a foundation for understanding how old a particular card's grade is. Let's check it out. All right, so when we look at the first generation, again, we want to be able to identify what's going on with when a card was graded, because things definitely are different now than they were then. The big giveaway here is the long barcode. There's only one generation that had the long barcode. It was generation 1. And that tells you a lot. Now, you can also see the serial number over here. And the serial number also helps us to identify when. But the problem, again, is the serial numbers are not fully sequential. So that's a very early one. You see a card in a holder with the long barcode, the standards are definitely different now than they were then. Now, the next big change you'll see, again, we see the serial numbers continuing to climb. They're not fully sequential, so you can't only look at the serial numbers. But in this one, you'll see it goes to a shortened barcode, but you'll see that the edge of the barcode doesn't line up with the edge of the font up above. But this tells us it's not the first generation. So this was obviously graded a little bit later. Now, we look at this card, and to me, at least looking at the front of it, the 7, see, that looks like a 7 to me. That's a pretty nice card. So it's not like automatically the card doesn't hold up, but in a lot of cases, it feels that way, at least. If we go to the next one, you can see the font changed a little, and I'm skipping a few of the generations. I'm just showing you the big changes where we can help to easily identify. This is a little bit of a bolder font, but you'll see that the barcode lines up at the left. So if you're at a show and you see a long barcode, you know this was graded in the 1990s. If you see a leading 0 on the serial number, that means it was probably late 1990s. We don't have exact dates because there was overlap. If we look here at this next one, again, the font changes a little. The backs change as well. You could look at the full video that I did on this, but here there's not a leading 0 because we're up into the 1s. So that helps to identify a little bit as well. So these are 3 very, very early generation slabs. And there's no doubt that there are eras in which grading was more lenient and more strict. If we look here, and in fact, let's go back to that last screen for a second. You see how it says the name of the grade and has the number. In all 3 of these, it's on the same line. Mint and 9 are on this line. Near mint and 7, mint and 9, they're all on that same line. Once we get to this later generation slab here, the big change is that the number goes to its own line. So when you see the number go to its own line, you know that it's not a super early generation slab. So that's a big giveaway for us there. You'll also see that the number continues to climb. Again, do not be fooled by the fact that just because the number is high, there are some serial numbers with a start of a 9 that were done just kind of in the middle of nowhere for some reason. So the serial number is a clue, but it's not the ultimate answer to how old a slab is. They've gotten better about keeping them sequential more recently. So the number on the different line, on its own line, that's a clue that at least it wasn't a really old slab. If we go to the next one, again, that's the big difference here. If we go to the next one, this slab starts having the PSA logo here. It's a little hologram. Now this is still not a new slab. This is several years old. But it is an identification that it's more recent than this one. So again, numbers on its own line, but then this shows up here. Also, if we look, this is a starting number of a 2 on the serial number. Again, not fully sequential, but here it's a 2-3, and here it's a 2-4. So this is an early slab once this kicks in. And then the slab that you're probably most familiar with, which they've been doing now for a few years, is this lighthouse logo with the PSA with the blue and the red. And again, they've been doing this one for a fair amount of time. And then you can see the serial number continue to climb. All of which, again, the number is on its own line in each of these. So what all of these do is they give you a pretty good idea of when a card was graded. Remember that the serial number, again, I've said this before, I'll keep saying it. A serial number is a clue, but it's not the ultimate thing. Now, you might see a card that has this logo, this PSA logo, a new looking slab. Okay. It might have the number here and it might have the grade here. It might look just like this, but you'll see a slab that has like a 0 at the front. So what that was is it was an old slab that somebody had like this one, and they sent it into PSA to get reholdered. So just because we see a card that has the newer PSA logo like this, we still have to pay attention to the serial number. Because if it has a leading 0, that tells us, or it has a 2, or it has a 3, or a 1 at the beginning, it could be just a card that got reholdered. So there are a lot of clues, and each clue gives us an idea. If you see a card that has this, it doesn't mean it was just graded. Because if this number is a 0 instead of 3, it was a very early generation grade that was reholdered. Remember, when you reholder a card, the grade stands. They do not regrade it. So if you have a card that, for example, if somebody bought this card right here and you sent it in to PSA to get reholdered, the grade would stay a 9, even if the 9 is no longer something they would give a 9 to. It would stay a 9. But instead of the flip looking like this, it would still have this serial number. It would still have the leading 0. But it would look like this. So all of these are clues that give us an idea of what is happening with when the card was graded. So paying attention to the serial numbers is important. Paying attention to the flip itself is important. But what a lot of people are starting to do is these older slabs with the older flips that look old, they're reholdering them into these slabs, and it's making it more difficult for people to realize and know when the card actually got graded. For me, I have to believe that somewhere in the database at PSA, every single serial number has to have a date associated with it. To me, when you go to the PSA, serial number lookup, it should have the date of the grade. There's no reason for them not to add that information. Them not doing that concerns me, but that's what should be happening in my opinion. So again, I think we need to know this. And one of the tricks that a lot of people are doing is they're taking old holdered cards. They are holdering them. They're taking the old flips, the old long barcodes and things. They're sending them into PSA, and for 15 or 20 bucks, they'll put it in a new slab that's not all scratched up. And then they put a new flip. They will not change the grade. The grade will stand. They will honor the old grade, and the serial number stays the same. So the serial number is pretty important. But again, it's not fully sequential, so it doesn't tell us the whole story. So if you're seeing a card that is in a new flip, but the serial number starts with a 2, it is a new holder. But that card was graded quite a while ago, which the standards on paper are the same, but the technology and the number of graders and things have made it where it can't be identical because, again, it's done by humans and there's always going to be human error. I've not personally noticed any specific eras, any specific flips or serial number sequences that tend to be tougher graded than others. But I do think that's an interesting concept. If there was a stretch where maybe some new management came in and they tightened up the standards, that those cards, or loosened up the standards, those cards could be affected as being better or worse. But at the end of the day, the number is just a number. And that's really the big takeaway here. Don't just look at the card and go, oh, it's a 7. A 7 is a 7 is a 7. A 7 is not a 7 is a 7. A 7 from 1998 is different than a 7 now. Very different. So this is even more reason to buy the card, not the grade. And regardless of the number on the grade, you really, really need to look the card over to see if it's a card that you want. The grade is supposed to give us some peace of mind. But sometimes, depending on when it was graded, it doesn't. So we need to be aware of that. Fun video as always. One question I have is, what is your strategy for walking a big show like the National? I know I try to walk it by aisle, but dealers often have tables that swing around. I frequently find myself walking around a table that I have already viewed. Any advice? Now, Dave, thank you for asking the question. One of my highlights of the National was meeting you, Dave. Fantastic collection. Appreciate your sharing with many of us. And you're a great guy. I had a lot of fun talking to you multiple times. To answer your question, there's no doubt that the setup of this year's National was more difficult than many card shows to stay kind of organized. And where have I been? Where have I not been? It was very difficult. I think it was Ryan Nolan on Breakout Cards say, why isn't there one of those kiosks like when you go to the mall, right? And there's the big thing and it has, you look for a dealer and you have a map of the tables and it says, you are here. Why, how do I find this particular dealer? They're located here. And seeing that visual could help a lot of people find their way around to specific people they're looking for. Now they have an interactive app where you can do that, but it's such a big facility and you're looking on a phone where the Wi-Fi is going in and out and you're trying to be able to see these small numbers and these small names. It just seems like if they had 2, 3, 4 of those kiosks, one in each corner, that had a map, had a list of all the dealers, had a you are here where you can kind of find your way around. It seems like that would be a great idea. Just put it on a wall, plaster it on a wall, right? I thought that was a fantastic idea. That said, I thought the best way to kind of show what I did to stay organized with where I had been and where I hadn't been is to show you a visual of the map and kind of show you what I did to try to keep myself centered as to where I was and where I had been. So let's take a look at that visual and I'll explain it right here. All right, so this is the full map of this year's national. And as you look right here, this was the main entrance. This is the entrance to the show. So, along this, between the two rooms, there's the main room and the auxiliary room. The main room, there's a big curtain along the middle here with a bunch of food trucks. So, the food was all right in the middle here. And so, what happened is you come in and you're like, where do I start? Do I start right here? Do I start at this table here? Do I go back in here? And it made it difficult. So I'm going to go to the next screen. I'm going to kind of show you the struggle I had. So this is the main room. So when I came in, I immediately said, well, I don't want to miss this stuff in here. So I just kind of wandered through here. Now, there were some heavy hitters right off the bat. Chris Sewell, his table was right in here. James Elite Hunters was right in here. Ash was over back in here. There were a lot of, everyone was sprinkled in. I kind of wandered through here a little bit. And then what happened was I started just kind of going up and down the aisles like this. And when I was going up and down the aisles like this, what was happening is I was missing these end caps. So like a table, so this dealer right here, he had tables here, and then he had tables along the side. So if I would come all the way down and I was just doing the aisles, then I was missing the sides. So it made it really difficult to stay, uh, to see, know what you've seen and know what you haven't. So the first night, I was going up and down the aisles like this, and then I knew I was missing stuff. So what I ended up doing the next day is when I went through the show, I went in rectangles. So I went this whole rectangle. I went all the way around here. And a lot of times, all four of these booths were one dealer. So it made sense to do it anyway. So what I would do is I would come here, I would go all the way around, and then I'd go to the next one, and I'd go all the way around. And then I'd go to the next one, and I'd go all the way around. And then I'd do the next one all the way around. And I'd go all the way down here, and then I would do the same thing this way. I'd go to all four, and then I go to the next one, all four. Then I go to the next one, all four. It was really difficult. Now, for us as collectors, it would have been so much easier if they just connected them all the way through. But then you lose this surface area, right? You lose this spot. So the way to maximize their space is to allow them to have the ends of tables too. So I get why they did it. It just made it really difficult. So for me, I just did sections and I just went all the way around every little section. So this is two tables all the way around, all the way around, all the way around, all the way around. That was the only way I could stay organized. William Chapel was somewhere right in here. Again, they spaced them out. Now, why? How do they decide who has what table and where? It's literally the person who has been selling at the National the longest has first pick. So throw this whole map up here. And the guy who's been at the National for 40 years, he could pick any table he wants, any booth he wants. And then once he picks, the second guy gets to pick. And then they block that one up. So maybe the first guy picks, these two booths. And then the second guy picks maybe these two booths. And then the third guy picks these two booths. And so when it's your turn to pick, you go. So one of the reasons that the main room had a lot of vintage is because the guys that have been selling and dealing for the last 40 years, those are the vintage guys that have been around forever. The auxiliary room had a lot of the new stuff because all of the guys that have been around forever, they wanted to be in the room with the entrance, the main room. This room had higher ceilings. It was more comfortable. The air conditioning worked better. This room had it had the noise from the
breaker area, and it had all the autograph lines, and it had a lot of this stuff going on. So this room, to me, was kind of a secondary room, and that secondary room had a lot of the newer guys because they had lower picks because they've only been doing this for 6 years or something. That's not to say there weren't some great booths in the auxiliary room. Tim Payne was somewhere like right. I think he was right here. Stan was somewhere right in here. There were some great booths in here as well, but because it was first come first serve based on how long you've been doing it, a lot of the best vintage booths were in this main room and in this kind of main section right in here because they had the first pick and they want to be kind of near the entrance and all the foot traffic from the PSA pavilion. So that would be my advice: is find a system that works. I mean, you could go all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, and then go sides, go all the way this way, and then all the way this way. You just have to find a system that works for you. But the system that works for me, Dave, is I just did this cluster, then this cluster, then this cluster. And it ended up working out pretty well, but it was definitely difficult to stay focused. The other thing I did is if there was a card that I saw that I was interested in. So let's say I was at this booth right here, booth 714, and I saw a card, I liked it. What I did was I pull it out, asked to look at it, I take a picture of it. And then I would get the booth number, usually by asking the dealer. And I would text myself. I would send a text message to myself of the card and the booth number. So I'd send a picture of the card. So let's say I saw T206 Chrissy Mathewson I liked here. I'd text a picture of that card to myself, and then I would text myself booth 714 Chrissy Mathewson. And then as I went through the show, I said, where was that Mathewson? I'd look at my own text message to myself that had the picture and had the booth number. And then I would find booth 714 and off I went. So that's the method I used. Doesn't mean it's the best method, but that's kind of what I decided to go with.
Thoughtful responses as usual. Question: since you've had such memorable experiences buying great cards at the National in Strongsville, are you less interested in buying from eBay since the experience isn't part of the purchase? This is a great question. It is a great question, but it's a tough question. And the reason it's a tough question is sometimes our hands are tied. Depending on the part of the country in which you live, there may not be many shows. Your only way to buy cards, if you live in some rural area, is to buy online. And you don't have the opportunity to go to card shows very often, depending on what you collect, right? If you collect something kind of rare, if you're a John Mangini who collects things that a lot of us don't even know it exists, or Rick's vintage oddball cards, you can't just go to your local card show and find some of that stuff. It's just not going to happen. But there's no doubt about it. Like, I will remember the dealer I bought my Walter Johnson T206 from and my Ernie Banks 54 Tops from. I know I have a great memory of where my 49 Leaf Warren Spawn came from and where, all the cards I bought in Strongsville. Tim Payne is the guy I bought my Rogers Hornsby from. He's the guy I bought my Sammy Boz from. I'm standing next to my buddy Don and Orlando as I bought the Sammy Boz. I'm standing next to, a couple of friends and Darren and David as I bought the Hornsby and the Rube Marquardt. So there's no doubt that buying in person is more memorable. You remember the experience, you remember who you're with, you remember the dealer, you remember where in the room. That is way more fun. It's not close. If you said, where did you get your Joe Montana rookie? I'd just say eBay. Well, who? I have no idea. Where did you get your Gale Sayers rookie? A guy on eBay. Who? I have no idea. I just saw it, I bought it, and it came to the house. The memory attached to the card is much different. It's sort of like a gift that you get. You know, it's like a birthday or it's Christmas or whatever, and you remember opening the gift. You remember who gave it to you. And that's one of the reasons why some gifts, it's hard to toss them, right? You're cleaning out your closet and you're like, I can't get rid of this shirt. I remember, you know, when my mom gave this to me at Christmas, and I remember where I was sitting. You attach these memories to it. I've mentioned this before. It's like the movie Toy Story. The reason that movie is genius is because a lot of our items we have emotional attachment to. I have a lot less emotional attachment to cards I buy in bulk and cards that I buy online. It's so much different than buying it in person. So I 100% would prefer, yeah, I want to buy in person. But depending on what I'm looking for, it's not that common that a lot of these cards will be in front of me at a show unless I fly across the country in order to buy it at the National or at Strongsville or something. So do I prefer to hold the card, look it over, look at this three-dimensional object in 3D in my hands under good lighting and buy it in person rather than look at a two-dimensional picture and buy it and hope that when it arrives, it looks like I think it looks? Not even close. The memories of the card are part of the specialness of many of the cards that I have. But again, depending on what you're collecting and what you're searching for, sometimes you just don't have any other choice than to find it at an auction house and buy it and have it shipped. So at the end of the day, in person is the best. But in person, in a lot of cases, depending on what you're buying, isn't always an option. Question for next week. What is your take on the partnership between Fanatics and PSA? What does it mean for the hobby? Are we ready to become ill at the sight of a Fanatics slab? Okay, Fanatics, PSA. Now, I'll start by saying I've read a little bit about that partnership that happened within the last month or so. I'm not super familiar or even really care that much about this particular partnership because it doesn't really affect me in the way that I collect. But basically what happened is, you know, PSA has made a deal with eBay, for one, where you can have your card shipped to PSA and then from PSA put it in the vault and have it listed on eBay without ever touching the card after it's been graded, and then they'll ship it for you. Like, that's a thing. And they're basically the overarching summary of the Fanatics deal is you can kind of do the same thing with Fanatics Collect. So you can get a card at Fanatics Collect, have it sent over to PSA, have it graded, have it listed, and not need it to go from Fanatics to you, from you to PSA, from PSA back to you, and then you back to Fanatics in order to list it. It can go directly back and forth between Fanatics and PSA. Now, that is more for people who treat cards as currency, right? There are a lot of people that I know, and they've said to me on comments and stuff, Greg, why don't you keep your cards in your vault, in a vault, like the PWCC vault or the eBay vault? And I'm like, because I have cards because I want to look at them. I don't want to look at a picture of it. I want to hold it. I want to hold the artifact. I don't want to look at pictures of the artifact. That's just me. Now, that's not to say that I'm right and someone else is wrong, but the way that I collect is I want to have my card in my own possession. I want to look at the actual item. Now, this, I think, is more geared toward a lot of the flipping of modern cards. And that's largely where it feels like Fanatics is geared towards. Fanatics bought Tops, and Fanatics is doing a lot of stuff with modern cards and experiences with younger collectors that doesn't affect my portion of the industry that I'm most interested in. I'm not against autographed cards. I have some. I'm not against patch cards. I have a few. I I get that that's what a lot of people collect, but Fanatics seems to be geared toward not old cards, right? Their interest is in new stuff that's being opened right now. So the partnerships they want to set up with an eBay or with a PSA or with a whoever is going to be geared around the modern cards because they're producing and selling modern cards. It's not going to affect vintage cards as much. So personally, if this works for people that collect that way or flip, or that the hobby is not really the accumulation and curation of cards themselves, but the buying and selling and the margins that can be made of the transactions within cards, which is a lot of what modern collecting is, which is fine. It's just not my thing. I think that that's who is most affected by a partnership like this. Now, the part that I wonder about is Fanatics being the 300-pound gorilla in the room, right? They come in and they have so much money and they have so much power that what's next, right? They've done so much already. They have had such an influence already. The thing that they're missing is the grading companies. And I think a lot of us were thinking that Fanatics was going to buy either SGC or Beckett. And a lot of people kind of think or thought or feel that PSA's acquisition or collectors' acquisition of SGC was maybe a block from preventing Fanatics from pouring money into SGC. Is that true? I don't know. Again, that's not the focus of what I do. I don't cover a lot of hobby news. I'm surprised, to be honest, that Fanatics hasn't bought Beckett. I'm surprised that hasn't happened. I'm surprised they haven't bought one of these other companies. That surprises me. Will they? Maybe. So my biggest takeaway, if I'm being completely honest, with PSA doing a partnership with Fanatics is, well, okay, if they have a partnership with PSA, it seems like they might be less likely to be purchasing Beckett. And that, I think, even though Beckett is really struggling right now, I think that the more that Fanatics controls and the more power and weight that they carry, I think that means less competition, and less competition is generally bad for us. So I actually am okay with PSA doing a partnership with Fanatics because it at least maybe postponed Fanatics buying a grading company. I want there to be 4 or 5 viable grading companies. The fact that Collectors has purchased SGC and now owns SGC and PSA as a vintage, mainly vintage collector, that is not a good thing. It is not a surprise that SGC wasn't doing on-site grading at the National. And you say, oh, they said, Greg, what they said was that they didn't want to fall behind and create another backlog. Okay. Well, they said also that their window was 5 to 10 days that they were taking to turn cards around during the National and before the National. And my dad sent some cards in right before the National, and it took 10 days. Now, they were claiming during the National that they were at 5 or 6 days, but they didn't bring any of their graders. Allegedly, they were down, all the graders were still back at home in Florida grading cards and turning them around. But the turnaround time went from, I think they were saying 5.5 days before the National to during the National, it was 10. Because my dad had a submission there during the National. It was 10 days. So why did it take twice as long as it was right before the National? My tinfoil hat, I'm going to try to just keep over here on the shelf for a minute. So long story short, Fanatics versus, PSA partnerships. What's it mean? I don't think it means a lot for us. I would like to have heavy competition with grading. I would like there to be another viable company. And if Fanatics were to buy Beckett and build Beckett back up and Beckett be a serious competitor with the collector's holdings, that would probably be a good thing. So I don't know if I guess part of me is happy that Fanatics isn't buying up more, but also part of me wants Fanatics to put money into a dying grading company so that PSA and collectors and SGC isn't the only game in town. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it. I kind of have been going back and forth. That's kind of my take. Hi, Greg. I'm new to the channel, so this may have already been asked, but I'm curious how you, as a personal finance teacher, budget for the hobby. I heard you say you're debt-free, and that is great and surely affects your budget. How about explaining how you do it and how you would recommend someone with a little debt they are trying to pay off should do it? All right, so my business finance teaching philosophy, I teach out of a textbook, but I do a lot of anecdotal personal experiences stuff along the way with my students. The number one thing I think that's the most important thing is before a month starts, before you get paid, before you pay a bill, is you should know where every one of your dollars that is coming in is going to go. So you should know, okay, this amount is going to go to my electric bill. This amount is going to go to my water bill. This amount is going to go to my mortgage. This amount is going to go toward food. And then you need to stay within those amounts. That's just budgeting. That's budgeting 101. You have a category, you have so much you can spend. At the end of the month, if there are 3 days left and I've spent all of my money for food, I'm going to see what's in the freezer. I'm not going to go spend more money. That is a big piece of budgeting. And then the other piece of budgeting for me is that you need to have money set aside for surprises because nothing lasts forever. Your refrigerator is going to break, your car is going to break, you're going to need new tires for the car, you're going to get a leaky roof, you're going to have a sprinkler break, you're going to have a garbage disposal go out. All of those things are going to happen. And it's not because, your life is horrible and those things only happen to you. It's because those things have a life cycle and they wear out. So you need to be prepared for those things because if you have every dollar pegged and spent, then when there's an unexpected thing, then you have a major problem. So you have to have money set aside for those things. So that's kind of my philosophy on budgeting. Cards are the same way. In my home, in my family budget, my wife and I each have a category called guilt-free. I have Greg's guilt-free money for the month. It's $100. My wife has $100 of guilt-free money. I can buy whatever I want with the $100 and not feel bad. My wife has the same. I spend my $100 every month. I immediately at the start of the month, I transfer it into my card account. Whenever I buy cards, it's from me selling something that I've had. Like maybe I had an old bicycle that I don't want anymore and I sell it. I can put that money into my card account. Maybe I have old cards and I decide to sell them. That money can go into my card account. Maybe I do a garage sale and I sell a fishing pole or something. That money can go into my card account. I don't use budgeted income other than that $100 for my card account. So what I try to do is have the hobby pay for the hobby for me. So if I'm at a card show and I see a card for $50 and I think it's a $90 card, I will buy it and I'll try to make $25, $30 on it by selling it on eBay or setting up as a dealer at a card show. That's how I operate. So I don't use family money for cards. That's just me. That doesn't mean that's right. I'm a teacher, so I have a pension, right? But in addition to my pension, I put 10% of my income. I know a lot of people say 15%. If I had Social Security, I'd be putting 15% of my income into like a Roth IRA. I put in 10% because I have a pension. Now, so I put in 10% of my money into my retirement. I max out my Roth IRA. Everything else goes into a 401k essentially. Now, when I had a house payment, what I did was I started with a 20-year loan. A year later, after a small raise, I refinanced it to a 15-year loan. The rates came down a little bit. I got a little bit of a raise. I did a 15-year loan. Then what I did is, in addition to my 10% of my income that I adjust each year going toward my retirement, what I decided to do is take a portion of my raise and add it to the principal on my house. So I decided I'm going to go ahead, and I got, a $250 raise this year per month. I'm going to take, 80 of those dollars, or I don't know, 50 of those dollars, and put them into my retirement. The rest of it, I'm going to put toward principal on the house. Now, because I did that for 8 straight years on a 15-year loan, I paid off my 15-year loan in 8 years. So I was putting in enough for a 15-year loan, and I was adding each month to the principal based on my raise for the year. Now, that's how I did it. Now, I went without. There were a lot of friends of mine that were driving nicer cars, that were going on vacations, and I said, no, I'm going to bite the bullet and try to pay off this house. I wanted to pay off the house before my kids started college because I didn't want to go into debt or have them go into debt for college. So then I now have the money that I don't spend on my house payment goes toward is this interesting? I know it's a card channel. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to answer the question as best I can. But I take the money that would have gone toward my house payment and I set that aside for their college. Now, they have 529 accounts that they've had since before they were born. But in addition to that, now I have some money. So I take what was my house payment, that same amount, and I don't just spend it and add it to my budget. What I do is I take that amount and I put it in my savings account. And that savings account grows to help with the costs of things that come up that you have when you have young adults. They need a car, or they have a college funds, or whatever it is. So that's how I do it. I live on a pretty lean budget. Now, people can make the argument, and you can leverage debt, there are benefits to having a house payment, and instead of paying off your house, taking that money and putting it into your retirement. You can make a really strong argument that that's the smarter way to do it, depending on what your interest rate is. I get that. For me, I just don't like the feeling of owing money. I like knowing that if everything hit the fan at the same time, I still own my house. That brings me peace. That brings me peace of mind. So that's how I operate. I'm not a debt person. I don't have any credit card debt. I pay that off at the end of every month. So I don't have a house payment. I don't have credit card debt. I don't have student loan debt. When I was going through my credential program as a teacher, I was literally paying cash each month for the classes. That's just how I like to be. That doesn't mean I never have debt. I have a car payment. And the reason I have a car payment is because the interest rate on the car loan is about a third of what I get by having that money in the bank. So I have money in the bank. It's earning an interest rate that is 3 times the interest rate that I pay on my car loan. I still don't like the fact that I have a car loan, and part of me wants to just write a check and pay it off. But I feel more comfort by having that money in the bank. This is probably way more information than anybody cared about my finances, but that is how I operate. So I teach my students, be careful of the dangers of credit card debt, be careful of the dangers of student loan debt, Be careful of the dangers of a car loan when you're a young person. Just be careful of those things and assign your money to where it's going to go each month. Before you get it, know where it's going to go, and then live within your means in that limit. If it's start of the school year and my kids need back to school supplies, what we will do is we'll make a budget category for school supplies, and that might come out of a different category. Maybe that means we'll go out to dinner one less time this month so that they can get school supplies. I adjust that budget every single month. That's what I do. I hope that helps. But the key for the hobby is find a way for the hobby to pay for the hobby. Don't take it out of family funds. That's how I live. Doesn't mean it's right, but that's how I do it. Now, remember, down below in the description, I'll have a link. The link will be to the July community pickups, show and tell submissions. Just give me your name, give me the card, upload a good picture of the card. I'm really excited for this month. And always, if you have a question for an upcoming episode, leave that in the comments below. I genuinely look forward to hearing what everybody is interested in getting my thoughts on, even if it's about my personal finances. I look forward to hearing what you submit.